Hi there, welcome to the Patreon review request video. It's early September 2018, and I hope you're not expecting anything like we had in the last video. I would like to thank Adam Britton for bringing a crocodile to the action. I would also like to thank him for ruining every video that follows. I don't have anything to rival a crocodile, so if you're tuning in expecting that, I'm afraid you're out of luck. We're in my dining room though, so how's that? Okay, before we start, this is a little important feature here. Let's have a milk stout nitro, which you of course hard pour. You don't pour it like a regular beer. This is the best part of it. It's like lighting a cigarette is the best part of smoking. If you could say there's any best part of smoking. I guess the best part is lighting it, or that's tied with when you're done with the cigarette and you flick it away. Those are the best parts of smoking. Haven't done that in a long time. So this is the best part of drinking these beers. It's tied with actually drinking it is doing that hard pour. All right, that's enough of that nonsense. This month, not even month, this video, John Roberdeau starts with, he says, after the high of, did I explain what this is? Is there anybody watching who's like, what is he doing? If you support me for $10 or more on Patreon, every so often, roughly month and a halfly, you'll get a message from me saying, hey, what's something you'd like me to review? I will then read your request. I will offer you a counter recommendation with the understanding that what you request you might not be recommending. Fair enough. And then we'll randomly determine one of these, and somewhere down the line, a review will be posted. So we're starting with John Roberdeau's pick. He says, after the high of In the Hills, the Cities, which was a Clive Barker short story he had me read, I submit Blood Bowl 2, which is at least as good. Come on, John Roberdeau. There are like 4 different kinds of elves you can be, he says. Years ago, when I was a guest on your podcast, we discussed it briefly, John writes, and you were concerned that 1, it was only good in multiplayer, and 2, it's the kind of game that almost required mentorship to get on board with. You're right on both counts, John says. The only way to get the real experience is to play in a league with real people. Oh. There's persistence as players level up, get injured, and die. There are real stakes and season-level considerations about team value and risk. There is such a league that was recruiting from quarter to 3. The season's coming, they're starting a new season. If this is chosen, I request you play some games to learn what's up. He says he would be happy to do some explanatory skirmishes with me. And then I joined the league for their season. The commitment is roughly 1 game a week for a few months. All right, John Roberdeau, I don't like sports, even if there are orcs and elves involved. But fair enough. I'm willing to try this. My counter recommendation, when you bring up things, the whole idea of a season with persistent injuries and death and that season-long risk-reward concept makes me think of Darkest Dungeon. I like this idea of persistent injuries being a fundamental part of a character. In a lot of games, a character gets a persistent injury, you just park him or her, they heal up, shrug it off, and they're back in action. Darkest Dungeon, nope, you got to deal with what they pick up along the way. So there you go. I'm sure you've played it, John, but you mentioning persistent injuries made me think of that. So Darkest Dungeon, my counter recommendation. By the way, there's this creepy nighttime window here on this side of me, this boring white wall on this side of me where I could have hung something like pretty or a picture. I could have like hung a game box up there. But instead, there's going to be words here, so that it's not going to be boring and empty for too long. Like there, you see John, wait, there, whatever. Blood Bowl 2 is already up there. Number 2, Greg Ambrose, who posts as dive, says, hey Tom, this is my first crack at the whole review request thing. I'm going to start with a blast from my past, something I hold in high regard, just to lay my cards out on the table. I'd love to hear or read your review of the original Ghostbusters. I think that would be fun to read, even if you shred it. Now I just need to work my way back through your past reviews so I can have an idea of what other folks have asked for. First of all, Greg, repeat requests are fine. I'm happy to re-review things. It's whatever you like. So, Ghostbusters, right. I have not seen Ghostbusters in, gosh, maybe since the 80s. That can't be true. But I maintain when it comes to horror comedies from the 80s, that there is a clear dichotomy between people. It's sort of like you come up to anyone and you say Jaws or Star Wars. They have an answer, generally. Police, or The Police, or Blondie. They have an answer. Here, I think, is another one of those dichotomies. Some people are Ghostbusters folks when it comes to horror comedies from the 80s, and that's very much in line with the Saturday Night Live sense of humor and that cast branching out into movies. So they're the Ghostbusters faction, but then I belong to the other faction. And that is the Return of the Living Dead faction. Those are the folks who like their horror comedies a little darker. Dan O'Bannon, who wrote and directed that, right? It's very much his flavor, his style. So I am a Return of the Living Dead person. It sounds like you, Greg, are a Ghostbusters person. That's all right. We can get along. We totally can. But there's my counter recommendation. I'll give Ghostbusters a watch. You give Return of the Living Dead another watch. Number 3, Sam Spackman. Keeping with the Philip Glass theme, he asked for a review of a Philip Glass opera last month. I request Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters, a Coppola Lucas Schrader joint. I didn't know Lucas was involved. Sam, so some of these counter recommendations are not necessarily because what I'm recommending is good, but because there's something relevant in this recommendation that I think you might appreciate. So Paul Schrader's last movie, actually not, he just did something about a priest with Ethan Hawke called Reformed or something like that. The movie before that was a Nicolas Cage movie, and I know what you're thinking, and you're absolutely right, called Dog Eat Dog, and it's pretty awful, but fascinatingly so, in a way that only Schrader can do. I mean, you've seen The Canyons, right? Not on that level, to be fair, but it's well, I'll let you discover for yourself, and I'm also going to do something that I try to avoid. There's going to be a later point in this video where I recommend Dog Eat Dog. We'll get to that shortly. So, okay, Sam Spackman, Mishima. I've actually seen that a long time ago. Is it a, well, we'll find out. Trevor Apple, I'm requesting a review of Cowboy Bebop. This is anime, Trevor Apple. He says, I've seen a few times that other supporters have requested anime, and although it's a bit of a cliche to suggest Bebop as a gateway anime for Americans, I suspect, based on what I know of your tastes, that you would enjoy it. Cowboy Bebop is the little girl who dresses up like a sailor. It's like moon-themed, no? I think of it as an episodic, often terse mood piece with memorable, unique characters that seem to ooze effortless cool. Okay. And the music, especially the opening theme, is iconic, Trevor says. Hopefully this wins and I can hear your personal take on it. Trevor, my counter recommendation, I recently rewatched Aeon Flux. Not the cartoon, not the movie, the Karen Kusama movie with Charlize Theron, and it's something else. So that's not what I'm counter-recommending, though. The Aeon Flux movie opens with that with a close-up of Charlize Theron's eyeball and a fly gets in her eyelashes, and it's gross and weird. And if you didn't know the cartoons, you would think, what's that all about? But it's from I think an opening shot from the Aeon Flux cartoons. So I went back and I watched one of them, and was struck by a couple of things. So my counter recommendation, Trevor, is the Aeon Flux cartoons. Aeon Flux, at least in the early cartoons, and I think this changed, is clumsy, and she dies. That's not what I would have expected from the way they did the movie. So Trevor, there's my counter recommendation. Sandu Bogie says, Jonathan Gold was a food icon of Los Angeles, and I'm already drunk. I'm slurring my words. I haven't had dinner. I'm having a beer. I can't make any promises about what may or may not happen. This could get crazy. Jonathan Gold was a food icon of Los Angeles, and we should honor his passing. Oh, Anthony Bourdain, too. Food icons are dying. By forcing Tom to pick and watch one food movie from a recently published list and then write a review of it, the food movie from the list, with an eye towards its foodie content. And he sends me a link to the list, and it's written by, does he explain this? It's written by Jonathan Gold. And it's Jonathan Gold's list of food movies. And it includes, I'll just go down the list here, Udon, Jiro Dreams of Sushi, The Gleaners, The Exterminating Angel, The Bakery Girl of Monsieur, Christmas in Connecticut, Killer of Sheep, The Secret of Grain, The Grand Budapest Hotel. I guess it has the bakery stuff in it. And Chungking Express. By the way, Bogey writes, if you pick the movie Udon and get a craving, you can eat at one of Jonathan Gold's favorite udon restaurants, Marugami Monzo. And he said he would join me for that one. All right. So, Bogey, I don't know what kind of foodie movie list does not include Big Night. So, yeah, with Stanley Tucci. All right, so there's my counter recommendation, Bogey. And I'm sure you've seen Big Night, right? Number 6, George Dudas. Hi, Tom. I'm sorry I don't know where to find goats because I mentioned, that I would, to follow up on the crocodile, I'd have to get a T-Rex out here. And you lure T-Rexes by feeding them goats, as we all know from Jurassic Park. But he says if I look into Demon Souls on the PS3, I might find some goat-like creatures. And there you have it, he writes. His review request is Demon Souls. For me, the Souls games are perfect video games. The story is hidden somewhere in the world to be dug out, like some archaeological artifact. The gameplay is fair, which it is. And I like that even low-level mobs can kill you no matter what level your character is or what equipment you have. The risk-reward theme of carrying your souls, which are your experience points, are always in danger of losing them. How far do you push on, or should you go back and bank them? It reminds me of the tale of Sisyphus, he says. George, I'm with you there. I'm not sure that the tale of Sisyphus should be a favorable comparison for a video game, but I get what you're saying. He says, but beware, Demon Souls levels are huge. There are no bonfire shenanigans like in Dark Souls. Good luck in the Valley of Defilement, he writes. Maybe you'll find your goats there. Okay, George, so Demon Souls is the hardcore earlier one, right? Before they became more player-friendly. My counter recommendation, I recently played a science fiction Demon Souls called Immortal Unchained, and ran into dead ends pretty early and just wandered around an empty dungeon, and I can't say it worked for me. But the science fiction Demon's Souls that I would recommend, and this is your counter recommendation if you haven't played it, is called The Surge. What a terrible name is that? Number 7, Aqua Mafia, Brickleberry Season 1, Hold On to Your Hat. Didn't tell me much about what that was, so I looked it up. Discovered that Brickleberry is a cartoon about forest rangers. I couldn't think of any forest rangers in movies. There was that movie that Peter Berg did about the firefighters who were like, I think 14 of them who died in Arizona. But those aren't forest rangers, they're firefighters. And same, that movie Always with Richard Dreyfuss, John Goodman, Holly Hunter. I think they're forest fighters, firefighters, they're not forest rangers. And I realized everything I was thinking of, they were firefighters. They go out and fight forest fires. So my counter recommendation, Aqua Mafia, a movie from the 70s. I think it's even a made-for-TV movie, and it's got to be dreadful. But I remember it freaking me out as a kid, called Day of the Animals. And this is a movie about the ozone layer getting so thin that all animals go psychotic and start hunting people. And I mean, sure, mountain lions and bears and stuff, but also dogs and birds and guinea pigs and chinchillas and those sorts of things, I believe. Leslie Nielsen is in it, and it's not a comedic part. So there you go, Aqua Mafia. And I'm counter-recommending it because I'm sure there's got to be a forest ranger in it somewhere, I would think. Because it starts like there's people camping in the woods and mountain lions are attacking them, and they discover that, hey, the ozone layer's thin and animals have gone crazy. It is the Day of the Animals. There you go. Clay Heaton, I'd like to see a review of the Netflix show Sacred Games, based off Vikram Chandra's novel. Didn't know what this was. I looked it up. It's apparently a police procedural, or maybe it was a counterterrorism procedural, about police or intelligence agents, I want to say police, in Mumbai, in India. Which that is so far out of my range of police procedurals, because Scandinavian countries, police procedurals are a dime a dozen from them. Europe, certainly a BBC series. I'm sure there are even some maybe French and German ones. But a police procedural from the subcontinent, I am very intrigued. And unfortunately, Clay Heaton, because I know so little about cinema and TV and literature from India, the only thing I could come up with as a counter recommendation is going to be awfully trite. I remember in Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, there's a really cool scene where Tom Cruise gets into an electric BMW. It's product placement. You wouldn't know because it's a pretty sexy product, and drives it around in Mumbai. Frankly, I don't even remember if it's a car scene. I just remember thinking, wow, it's a pretty sexy car. So Clay, that's all I've got. But Sacred Games, thank you for that recommendation. Andrew Shee, please review your local legislative body. I'm not sure what that means in Los Angeles, the City Council, Board of Supervisors, take your pick. I'm not really looking for your perspective on their political or policy decisions. I'm more interested in your take on how they perform live in action. At a public hearing, a committee meeting, a ribbon cutting. Americans rarely see our political leaders in the flesh, he says, and I wonder how seeing them live as real human beings would affect how you perceive them. Okay, Andrew Shee. My counter recommendation is not local legislative bodies, but local newspapers. And I don't mean like city newspapers, like, the Boston Globe. I'm talking about like smaller community level. I live in an area in Los Angeles called Tujunga, and we have the Tujunga, I don't know, the Tujunga Weekly or whatever. It's the local run newspaper, and frankly, it's not much of a newspaper. These are basically ad rags for local advertising, but they've got to put in some token editorial content. So they have these poor schlubs like writing local news coverage and maybe even a movie review. It's kind of endearing in the same way that bad community theater can be endearing. So there's my counter recommendation: is go find your local business advertising rag and read whatever editorial content they've put in it. It can be cute. And that sounds awfully condescending. I don't mean it to be mean. I'm serious about that. Andrew Stanko says, thanks so much for injecting some Jurassic Park into the review request video. It's that crocodile. I think I'm going to be hearing about this thing forever. My inner capitalist wants you to offer a higher price tier we can pay to have our requests eaten by smog. Whoa, Andrew, what are you going to request, that it would be fed to a crocodile? Adam, my brother, Anna, his brother and friend of the movie podcast, and his girlfriend, for those keeping track, and I, basically the Andrew Stanko clan, all watched the movie Allied recently. We all have very strong opinions on the film. I like how that can go either way. And there is an QT3 movie podcast about it. There were many strong references and performances, especially Adam commenting on Brad Pitt getting a bad Botox job. I think it sounds like some of you loved it and some of you hated it. Interesting. I was going to counter-recommend Marion Cotillard is in that, right? I don't know Allied. She's in a really challenging movie called Rust and Bone, which, you know what, instead of counter-recommending that can be dicey. That's weird. I think it's a French director. It's got a weird flow to it. I'll just recommend a second viewing of Inglourious Bastards. I think that movie holds up for second viewing. Like the conversations, the scene with Michael Fassbender in the pub, the basement pub, certainly Christoph Waltz. I love this idea of alternate history fantasy in which Hitler is burned alive in a theater full of Nazis. Inglourious Bastards is ambitious and flawed, but I think admirable and bears up under repeated viewings, especially. So there you go, there's my counter recommendation. Craig, The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. This book starts with extreme tension and never stops, he says. All right, Craig. This puts me in mind of when you talk about starting with tension and never stopping, I remember, and I actually had to look, I can't believe I've never counter-recommended Cormac McCarthy's The Road. I'm sure I've talked about it before. The sense of tension in that is pretty powerful, but especially, I recall, partway through, they find a cache of food, and the sense of relief that you get at that point, like you might not even realize the kind of tension that he's applying as this father and son struggle to survive, but when they finally find that food, it feels like a weight taken off of your shoulders. It's almost like a physical sensation. So, Craig, when you mentioned tension in this Paul Tremblay book, it made me think of Cormac McCarthy's The Road. There's my counter recommendation. Yarmo Padiaho, Scythe, the board game. I'd like to read your review of it. Yarmo, so Scythe is I think, dudes on a board. I hate that name for a genre, but that's kind of what it is. My current favorite dudes on a board game, there's kind of a tie. The one that I think I've played most and thought, yeah, okay, this is a keeper, I really like it. I wrote this up for review a while ago. I really like Ennis as a dudes on a board game, but here comes a challenger. This just came out, and it's striking. What it tries to do, how it does it, the reactions I've got from people to whom I've introduced it. I have strong feelings about how you should experience it. For instance, don't play it with 4 players. Whatever you do not introduce this to people as a 4-player game. Introduce it, and not as a 2-player game, certainly not as a 5 or 6-player game. Teach it to 3 people, you and 2 other people. Ennis is only 2, 3, or 4 players, so there's 2 counter recommendations. I'm quite fond of both of those games. Misguided. When I think of a show canceled in the middle of its first season, he might be riffing on, we talked about Deadwood in the last video. I immediately think of Miracles. Skeet Ulrich alongside Angus McFadden, Melissa Ramirez, and Hector Elizondo. Ulrich plays an investigator for the Catholic Church who winds up questioning his own faith. The show is full of religious imagery, tinged with elements of horror and suspense. It was way more than audiences could handle in 2003, he says. Man, that's old, Misguided. I remember saying at the end of the first episode, I'd give it 3 weeks. I was wrong, it lasted 6. It bounced around by the Iraq War and Michael Jackson. Fortunately, the entire first season was eventually released. It's still a shame, though, because I think the show could have found a home on a place like FX these days. I hope you enjoyed as much as we did. All right. Man, I couldn't tell. I may have never even heard of this. I've probably heard of it and just forgotten about it. So, okay, Misguided. Isn't there on Fox with Patrick Fugit, isn't there is it called Outcast? Or isn't there some exorcism-themed thing on Fox? But it sounds like Miracles was an early attempt at this. My counter-recommendation, Misguided, when you talk about TV series with a budget Johnny Depp, which, no disrespect to Skeet Ulrich, he doesn't command a Johnny Depp salary, I'm sure, but he's got the look. As far as TV shows with a budget Johnny Depp, I recommend Fear the Walking Dead. Now, Fear the Walking Dead was wretched during the first couple of seasons when I watched it. I've heard it's gotten better. I am intrigued by what I saw that they did with the death of a main character, which I thought was pretty good. Something that I think Walking Dead wouldn't dare do. And it's got a guy who looks like Johnny Depp, kind of. So there's my counter recommendation, Fear the Walking Dead. But you have to watch the first 2 crappy seasons to get to the good part, I'm sure. Alex Chapman. Tom, I vote for a book called After. Oh, so Alex Chapman and I had a conversation about deportation, and I wanted to counter-recommend to him the video of a young Swedish woman getting on an airplane and basically refusing to sit down so it can't take off until some people who were being deported to Afghanistan, it actually in this case turned out to be just one gentleman, until they were removed from the plane with her. And it's really it's just very moving to watch her filming herself and how she's overcome with emotion and how she obviously feels strongly about this. You can also imagine in the follow-up afterwards, Fox News discovered, well, it's a whole big thing, but the video of her is incredible to watch. And the whole Fox News nonsense about the deportee and why he was being deported and how Fox News tried to use this as a political football, don't get me started. You've already have. So Alex, if you haven't seen that video, I recommend it. But anyway, on to what Alex really recommended. He says, try season 1 of The Americans. I've been binging on it recently, and I'm up to season 5. Oh my God, 5 seasons. I'm enjoying a lot of it. Also, Carrie Russell, who I'd never heard of prior to watching this, is strangely alluring. Alex Chapman, there's nothing strange about Carrie Russell's allure. Isn't she the one in the Mission Impossible with Philip Seymour Hoffman? I think that's Carrie Russell. Alex Chapman, my counter recommendation, there's a writer named Jesse Armstrong who has worked with Armando Iannucci. He's one of the writers for In the Loop. He did my favorite episode of Black Mirror, an episode called The Entire History of You. He has recently done I think the second season is, the first season's done, there's a second season ordered, I believe, a series called Succession, that I heartily recommend, and I think you would appreciate it. You might think from the title that it's boring stuff about your people's kings and queens and whatnot, Alex Chapman being British. It's not. It's an incredible cast, and Jesse Armstrong's writing is just so incisive, like it cuts. I love his dialogue. So Succession's my counter recommendation. Juan Regada. All right, many things I want you to review, but sadly I can only pick one. So random pick this month is Thornton Wilder's Ides of March, which I assume you might have read. He says, I have not. I find oddly relevant today, Juan says. It's a book I really like, but I've only read it translated, so it might be different in the original language. I'm assuming Juan is talking about it being translated into Spanish. It's also short, so it should be easy to get done. By the way, in the unlikely event that this gets selected, I want to point out that I agree with the second paragraph of the Wikipedia article on the novel. He didn't say what that was, so I looked it up. The second paragraph, excuse me, basically, sorry, that was rude. The second paragraph basically says that Ides of March should be read a second time to fully appreciate. And one says this book has many readings and most of them are hidden below the surface, although the author does point you towards where to look. So, all right, Juan. So here's a counter recommendation that I don't think is actually very good, but on reading it, you get to a certain point where you're like, oh, I wonder if I read this a second time, if I would appreciate it differently, if I might like it more. So John le Carré's son is a fellow named Nick Harkaway, and he wrote a book called Gone Away World that I heard a synopsis of, and I thought that sounds intriguing, and read it and didn't really care for it. It's a weird kind of apocalypse novel, but it does a thing partway through that made me want to maybe read it a second time. I don't know if it would hold up, but I'm sure it has nothing in common with Ides of March, but when I think back to books that might feel different the second time you read them, maybe Gone Away World. Unfortunately, it's not very good, so a tentative counter recommendation. David Short. I could request any TV show, he says, like maybe Firefly. Yeah, I've still never seen Firefly. I hear it's good, right? I mean, it's like a Star Trek thing, right? It's just like Star Trek. The ship flies around and has adventures. Firefly. My counter recommendation, David Short. Have you seen The Good Place, this NBC sitcom? This third season's about to start. I lose patience with it a lot, but I'm intrigued by what they do and their approach. And I think that Drew Goddard, who did Cabin in the Woods with Joss Whedon. I was confusing it with the Tremblay novel that someone asked for earlier. Cabin at the End of the World. At any rate, Drew Goddard and Joss Whedon did a movie called Cabin in the Woods, and Drew Goddard is one of the executive producers on The Good Place. It's also got a guy from Parks and Rec, so it's got kind of Drew Goddard's mind-bendy trippiness, because he's also from Lost, with the heart of Parks and Rec. And I'm not entirely sure it always works, but I was super glad I stuck with it through the first season. Not sure I feel that way about the second season. But there's my counter recommendation. Matthew Jameson, watching that crocodile, there's the crocodile again. I'm never going to hear the end of it. Watching that crocodile in last month's drawing was more exciting than watching Rogue minus a dreamy Radha Mitchell, he writes. And I got that reference. Rogue is, I think it's the Greg McLean one, the guy who did Wolf Creek. It's a killer alligator movie. It's terrible. It's the bad one. The good one is called Blackwater. Is that Greg McLean? No, that's Andrew, oh shoot, the Blackwater guy. Then he did The Reef. He did some terrible jungle monster movie. But Blackwater's the one to watch. Rogue is the terrible one. At any rate, Matthew Jameson said it was more exciting than Rogue, which frankly is not saying much, Matthew, but I appreciate the sentiment. He says, but that won't be this month's pick, Rogue. Is that the one with Sam Worthington also? Yikes. Instead, how about a review of Wizard of Legend? It's an action roguelike that I've been really enjoying lately. Matthew, I looked this up. I don't know why this wasn't on my radar before. It totally looks like the kind of thing I would like. There's a moth in here. I'll edit that out. And he says, so my counter recommendation was just going to be Dead Cells, but you've played Dead Cells. We all know how great Dead Cells is, right? Because Dead Cells it's really great. But my counter recommendation is on the Switch. Matthew Jameson, you have a Switch? If not, this counter recommendation is going to do you no good. I'm going to let the Switch introduce what my counter recommendation is. You've probably never heard of this. You might have just breezed past it on the Nintendo store and thought, that's dumb, I'll never get it. This is actually really good. Imagine Choplifter, but as a roguelike. And it even has a campaign mode where you work your way around island. So here you go. Let me just... So the way the announcer says the name of it, he's just got so much enthusiasm that I should let him tell you what it is. Here we go. Oh, I'll hold it up to the mic. All right, stand by. Here we go. Ready? He's going to say it. Oh, the loading time on the Switch, right? Here we go. That's not it. Stand by. He's super excited. Sounds like... Okay, here we go. None of these are these are developer studio logos. Here we go.
Rogue Aces!
He's so excited. I think this is really good. Just as an action game, as a roguelike. I've had it for a while. I find myself just going back to it, and there's my counter recommendation. But you need a Switch. You know, I say you need a Switch. I've actually never investigated if it's on the PC or any other platform. So, all right, Rogue Aces. Bruce Garrick. Oh, shoot. Oops. Thought I was prepared. I did not come up with a counter recommendation for Bruce Garrick. You guys help me. Here we go. Yeah, all right. I put a lot of thought in this counter recommendation. Bruce Garrick says, okay, Sir Tom Chick. I don't know why he's knighted me, and I also doubt he has the power to do that. He says, okay, Sir Tom Chick, in an attempt to change things up and get you something you might actually play and like, but still has interesting systems. Did he just imply that things that I play and like don't have interesting systems? Bruce Garrick throwing shade on me. He says, how about Enemy Coast Ahead, the Doolittle Raid? I like the Doolittle Raid. They took B-25 bombers off an aircraft carrier, bombed Japan, just for symbolic value. I think they ditched the bombers, too. They couldn't land them, right? They flew them over Japan and they just crash landed. Is that true? Because it was quite the feat to actually take them off from the carriers. You know, it's probably all in this game. I could learn all this stuff. He said the game is by Jerry White, he goes by Jerry, and is published by GMT. It's a solitaire game about the Doolittle Raid against the Japs. Derek, you can't say Japs. Against the Japs. But then so much more, he says, which is where my ears perk up. And he's actually told me about this before. In fact, you might play scenarios that have nothing to do with actually flying the raid at all. Sweet. Very interesting mix of history and personality. Those are two things I love, history and personality. Plus, it has a really cool debriefing system that lets you know how you did, like Nemo's War, only better. Because in Nemo's War, you look up a little paragraph that gives you an epilogue to Captain Nemo's career, his fate. Jerry White also designed Skies Above the Reich, which is great, and if you don't want to take Bruce Garrick's word for it, well, you'll have to, because he wrote a 5-star review at 2:45 that you should check out. But as I warned folks on Twitter, it might cost you $90, that review. He says, don't miss this one. I can't tell if he means Skies Above the Reich or Doolittle Raid. One other thing, if you do end up getting it, you'll need a second counter clipper. The game has some 1-inch counters for the bombers, which do not look good clipped with the 2mm clipper, which is the one that we've got. A 2.5 millimeter clipper is essential. Fortunately, Oregon Laminations makes one. All right, Bruce Garrick, my carefully considered counter recommendation, and I put a lot of thought into this. Every now and then I will see a game that I'm like, okay, that's dumb. But then I find out it has solitaire, and I'm like, all right, well, I guess I got to find out. This is a weird thing that they're basically memory puzzles, and I've tried them, and it just breaks my brain. You can also play it 2-player, but I would fail spectacularly. I'd have to play it 2-player against someone who just has no mental capacity to remember shapes and numbers and positioning, and they'd have to be terrible at that like I am. Then we might be on equal footing. But it's also got a solitaire mode, which is like puzzles, and I've tried them and decided this is way too much memory. I can't make any progress in this. But I've also decided next time I try it, I'm going to use a pen and paper, because there's nothing in the rules that says you can't record what you're doing. All right, it's a game called Trip Lock, and it comes with these really cool poker chips with symbols on them, and what it's about is picking locks. And there's little solitaire puzzle scenarios that has an AI that manipulates the chips. And every chip, should I be explaining all this? I didn't mean to get into all of this. There are 4 chips that have a yellow chip, it's like an Oreo, a yellow chip sandwiched in the middle that has a mechanism with a couple of symbols. And then these chips sandwiching on the outside are called fail-safes. And you flip them over as you manipulate them, and the outside exterior matters, and on the inside some of them have explosions, some of them have gears. And then, I could just go on explaining this, but at any rate, there's my counter recommendation, Bruce Garrick. A really funky, tactile, very, very tactile game about lockpicking, which involves manipulating and flipping stacks of poker chips, remembering symbols. I'm terrible at it, so I hate it, but I'm intrigued by it, so I love it. There you go. I gave that a lot of thought, Garrick. Thought for days on end about that one. There's my counter recommendation. Yeah, Doolittle Raid? Great. Here's what you should play. Josh Loveletner. So who we are? Yes. Of the second generation of science fiction writers that were actually active in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Oh, this is, I asked you guys on Patreon about classic science fiction authors, and boy, did I get a lot of great, you guys just have, I have this thread that I can go through now with all of these great recommendations for classic science fiction, because that's way outside of my wheelhouse. Josh says he was raised on familiar names like Bradbury, Asimov, and Clarke, but over time, I'm starting to come around to the opinion that Ursula K. Le Guin is one of the best writers of that generation. Is that Dragon Riders of Pern? Wait, Anne McCaffrey? Yikes. Did I just insult Ursula K. Le Guin? Maybe she never had a blockbuster to hang her hat on, although I'm sure many people are familiar with her Wizard of Earthsea series. As close to young adult novel as she ever wrote, but still pretty sophisticated, Josh says. Lathe of Heaven is fairly well known, and Left Hand of Darkness won the Nebula Award. All right, but the book I want to make you read, Josh says, is The Dispossessed. I often wonder what the world would be like if The Dispossessed held the place in American culture that Atlas Shrugs now holds. It'd be a better place, I suspect, Josh writes. Basically, without spoiling anything, The Dispossessed is about a completely anarchic society. Could such a thing work? What principles would it have? What might cause it to succeed or fail? Is it even a good idea? Well, if the Bengal tigers pick my number, you'll have to find out. There he is. How do you follow up on a crocodile with tigers from Bengal? Although that makes it, isn't Bengal Tigers like a sports team from Detroit or something? I don't know if that's a sports reference or a reference to actual tigers. I'm very confused when people talk sports. So, okay, a completely anarchic society. Wait, we have a cat. Hold on, let the cat in. A completely anarchic society. Hey, I'm off the frame here. All right, Cat, we're making a video. Your timing is horrible. Come on in. Come here. Well, you're gonna have to appear on camera now. I know, come here. I know, come here. Oh gosh, oh shoot. All right. All right. Okay, so as far as completely anarchic societies, my counter recommendation is, I think, a pretty bad movie from the 90s called The Trigger Effect. written and I think directed by David Koepp, who has done a lot of screenplays, most of which I think are bad. But Trigger Effect is, I don't know. So the idea is that there's a blackout. I think it's even Los Angeles, and he's examining this is before post-apocalypse movies were in vogue, and he's examining what would it be like if we lost all power and civilization sort of started to drain away. So Trigger Effect. Which I seem to, what I remember more about Trigger Effect than civilization draining away, Dermot Mulroney and Kyle MacLachlan, whatever, the guy from Twin Peaks and Dune, they're in it. But I think what I remember more about it is, and this is going to sound a little, well, what stood out most for me was Elizabeth Shue in a tight white tank top. That's a boorish thing to say. I'm very ashamed of myself. Right, Kat? Dave Sell. Hi, Tom. I had a good one in mind, but after listening to the Blade Runner movie podcast and the excitement for the part Dave Bautista, now you played, I have to go back to the request to review The Wrong Side of Town. Dave Bautista is in that as well, and he certainly nails his role. Thanks. I mean, I think of him as, I loved him. He's the Guardians of the Galaxy guy. He's Drax, right? But I loved him in Blade Runner. Was he in one of the shorts? I forget, because they did some shorts, some little short films that were like pre-Blade Runner stories, and I forget if his character was in one or if it filled out stuff. I think his character was in one, or at least it explained his character. But yeah, I love Dave Bautista too. Does he come from wrestling or something? I'm surprised I don't even know that. Surely, was he an MMA fighter? So my counter recommendation, Dave, and this again, so I mentioned it before when Sam Spakman asked for Mishima, Paul Schrader movie. Paul Schrader's movie before his most recent movie, Dog Eat Dog, is terrible, but there is a fascinating performance in it. Not Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage is doing Nicolas Cage. Willem Dafoe is fun. Willem Dafoe is, frankly, and he's supposed to be this way, pretty disgusting in it. But there's a fella named, I wrote his name down because I'd never heard of him before, and he strikes me as the kind of guy, too, who must have been like a wrestler or an MMA fighter or something, but he's like a big, hulking dude who just looks physically like he's got this just huge, powerful physical presence like Dave Bautista, but a weirdly calm manner. A fellow named Christopher Matthew Cook is in Dog Eat Dog, and I like that movie a lot for his scenes with a young actress I love named Louisa Krause, who I don't know why she doesn't get more work. Louisa Krause is great. So Louisa Krause as the typical, actually I'm not even sure if she's a prostitute in the movie. I think she is. But her hanging out with this Christopher Matthew Cook guy, with his character, I think his name is Diesel. I loved that scene. So for that alone, Dave Sell, I recommend a terrible movie called Dog Eat Dog. Ian Slutz, I'm back, and that means one thing. Cyrlin Games Codex is the hybrid of real-time strategy and deck builder. It's the game you were born to review. Ian tells me. Ian, you know how to flatter a guy. All right, Ian, my counter recommendation, I've discovered this lately. And I didn't, so this came out originally as, let me show you the box here. Oh, you know what, I can't hold it up because all the cards will spill out. They're arranged very specifically. So, Ian, here's a card game I found recently. It's called Xeno Shift. And you'll note shift is spelled with a fashionable Y. It originally was Xeno Shift Onslaught. I'm so drunk right now. I'm wasted. And Xeno Shift Onslaught, yeah, boy, had some problems. It was super difficult. I think it was supposed to be that way, but, well, this one that I just showed you, Xeno Shift Dreadmire, is their follow-up, and it's a standalone. You can integrate bits of Onslaught with it, but I really like this. And I came to it through, there's a Steam and iOS version of it where they just ported the game over. I messed around with that and was kind of like, yeah, this is really cool, but I need to be able to see everything on the tabletop at once. It's a common problem that board game ports have. So I'm like, I'm just going to buy this. And I've been playing that, and I really like it a lot. It's kind of a tower defense, horror, alien, science fiction themed, Starship Troopers-y game. Deck builder, of course, as well. So, Ian, there's my counter recommendation. You might already know it. Matt Bugby. Matt says, I nominate, and Matt, that's just such an adorable name. I wish my last name was Bugby. That's just really cute. I nominate I'm so wasted. I nominate Enemy Action Ardennes, a hex and counter war game that's great two-player and also manages to cram in 2 separate solitaire systems for playing each side. I think you'll enjoy it after all the solo board games you've tried lately, but more importantly, it'll impress Bruce Garrick. Matt, I've given up trying to impress Bruce Garrick. It's beyond I just don't have it in me to play these like super convoluted East Front war games that involve combat results tables and dry math. Matt, yeah. So I actually have this, and I've read over the rules. I love the idea of the different solitaire systems depending on which faction you're playing. Listen to me. There's the German faction and the American faction in World War II, as history teaches us. My counter recommendation, I'm more of a Pacific Theater guy. So this solitaire system, D-Day at Peleliu. It was originally a Omaha Beach system. Boy, that'll put you to sleep, another Omaha Beach game. And they made it for the invasion of Peleliu, a little tiny island where the Japanese are hunkered down. So the Japanese are the AI because they're basically on defensive, and you have to manipulate, you have to decide where you're attacking. And the map has a great sense of place with a little mountainous area and the beach where you land and the treacherous coral that you have to get through. It's a great sort of historical representation of a very specific battle, very specific place, and I like it a lot. It's a system that's been applied to, I think, 3 different battles, and I recommend the Pacific Theater one. All right, Matt, number 23, I haven't been saying the numbers. TK writes, he doesn't write this, I'm telling you this. I had a cat once, and when I was in college, and I was worried that the cat was lonely. And plus, cats are great in pairs. This guy has a dog to keep him company. Where's the dog, by the way? So I had a cat once and decided that I thought the cat was getting lonely. So it needed another cat, because cats can be social creatures. Actually, that depends. This isn't for me, this is for the dog. Honey, come, sweetie. Hi, good girl. Hi. Come here. Come over here. Come here. Come over here. Come over here. I don't know that she can get around here. Come here. Here. Come here. So I got a kitten to keep the cat company, and when you get an animal, you keep the animal around. You're like, what name should I give it? I'll let its personality sort of develop. And so I had the kitten. Come here, sweetie. Come here. Good girl. It's okay. I'll protect you from the cat. Come here. Look. You have to come on camera so people know you exist. This isn't for you. So the kitten didn't get a name for a while, and I would come home and say, come here, sweetie. Come here, honey. Come. Come here. I want to give you this treat. You want to come under here? Come here. Come here. You found a way. Look. Can you get at least your little snout on the... Come up here. Come up here. She's terrified of the cat. You know what? You'll have to trust me. There's a really cute dog down here. Come here, sweetie. Come here. Oh, sorry. There you go. Eat it. Get it. Good girl. Good girl. I hope there might be some on-camera shenanigans. At any rate, I would come home and say to the cat, hey, have you been nice to the kitten? The cat's name was Calvin. Have you been named after the theologian, by the way, not Calvin and Hobbes? Man, I'm pretentious. And I would say to the cat, hey, Calvin, have you been nice to the kitten today? Where's the kitten? What's the kitten doing? Are you getting along with the kitten? Eventually, I hadn't given the kitten a name for the longest time and just started calling it, and this stuck, TK. So TK, I had a cat called TK once, which stands for the kitten. Okay, TK, my suggestion is the movie The Big Year. Based on the cast, you'd think it's a straight-up comedy, but it's not. TK, I do think it's a straight-up comedy. Are you telling me this is not a comedy? It's a movie starring Owen Wilson, Jack Black, and Steve Martin. Those are the 3 leads. It's about bird watching. I looked this up, TK. You're telling me that's not a comedy. Okay. Maybe there's a reason I haven't heard of it. And then TK says, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Man, seriously? A bird watching movie with those 3? My counter recommendation, the guy who wrote Blade Runner is a fellow named Hampton Fancher, I love saying that name, Hampton Fancher. He wrote and directed a movie with Owen Wilson called The Minus Man, which I recommend. Lucas Necessary, I have purchased a number of board games such as Spirit Island based on your reviews. I've also watched movies based on your reviews, or alternatively, skipped them. So while this is vague, I would like you to review someplace you've been that's worth seeing, or perhaps totally worth avoiding. For example, he says, I visited Trinidad and Tobago and will never return. Wow, Lucas, okay. Harsh. The Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce will be heartbroken to hear that. What's wrong with Trinidad and Tobago? Now I want to know. He said, but Fiji's people alone made it one of the best experiences in my life. Oh, there you go. So there you go, Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce. So my counter recommendation, Lucas Necessary, not a place you've been, a place you grew up. I spent a long time, I grew up for a while in Mill Valley, California, which is up in the Bay Area. And then we moved out and moved to Arkansas, and that's where I mainly grew up. At a certain point, I was back in the Bay Area with someone, and it was a holiday. It was like Thanksgiving or something. We were back to see her family. I was back to meet her mom for the first time. And it was a holiday, so nothing was open and there was no traffic. So we spent that day, it must have been a Thanksgiving, driving around the Bay Area and across the Golden Gate Bridge to Mill Valley, which I had not been to since I was, how old are you when you're in 3rd and 4th grade? 9, 10? And it was really weird, like seeing the house that I grew up in and all that stuff. I mean, you guys know it. We all know how weird that is. You grow up someplace and you become an adult and you move away, and then when you come back, seeing that house again. But what was weird to me is from the house, I remembered how to get to Mount Tamalpais school, elementary school, which is where I went to school from, and it was like a weird thing, like it was bubbling up in my brain as she was driving, and I was saying, okay, oh, you go left here, oh yeah, right, and you go right down there, oh, and then left on this street, and then almost like magic, like there was the school. That was still in my brain somewhere. That was just really weird. Okay, the dog is running more. All right, you ready for this? Come here, sweetie. I need you to put at least your nose up here in the frame. Come here. Come here. Come up here. Can you guys see the dog's nose? No? Come here, sweetie. Come here. Get it. You can get it. She thinks I want her to sit. I promise there's a dog over here. There you go. Good girl. So there you go, Lucas Necessary. My counter recommendation, a place that you grew up in. Clay Carroll, there's a Netflix show called A Very Secret Service that you might enjoy. It's a French spy comedy with subtitles, he notes. Good for me. My French is very rusty. Season 2 just got released on Netflix, but even just Season 1 is worth your time, I think. Of course, that's for you to decide with a review. Clay Carroll, I noticed this is set during the Cold War. God, the cat's scratching me. Your claws. All right. All right, Clay Carroll. I don't know. Why isn't there more French TV? There's so much like British TV and Scandinavian TV. Why don't we have more French TV series? So my counter recommendation is a French TV series, I think the only one I can think of, called Les Revenants. It's translated as The Returned. There is a horrible American remake of it, but it is an intriguing, not really about zombies, but kind of French series based on a movie. It had a first season that I loved, and it had a weird sort of ending, like, okay, where's this going? And then the second season I petered out, and there's no third season. It's dead after 2 seasons. I don't know if it concluded, but there's my counter recommendation. I'm sure it's not, it's not a French spy comedy set in the Cold War, but it is a French zombie drama. Okay, Johan Osling. I request a review of a book I recently read, The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. Didn't this just get a Hugo Award? It got some applauded recently, which has, at least for fantasy I've encountered, a fresh take on world building. Johan, you know how to make me want to read a book. I think it also has an interesting take on the power fantasy trope that I've talked about in fantasy. All right. I actually thought this was a post-apocalypse thing. My counter recommendation, Johan, well, basically it's Maze Runner, the movie. I haven't seen I haven't read their books, right? I've seen the first Maze Runner. The second and third are just awful, but the first Maze Runner is pretty good. Here was going to be my counter recommendation. I'm going to go ahead and fold it in. Based on one of you guys, my Patreon supporters, I picked up these Brian Keene books. This one's called, what is even, The Rising. It's supposedly a zombie book, but the zombies talk and they drive cars, and it's awful. Then I bought this one. Like that wasn't enough. Earthworm Gods. It's about, in roughly chronological order in the book, a rain apocalypse, giant earthworms, mermaids, and Cthulhu. Those are all in here. It's awful. Terrible. Now, I was going to just disrecommend it, but the writer, Brian Keene, boy, is he prolific. If you look him up, you will see he's got like a GoFundMe page from about a year or so ago. He was burning brush in his yard and injured himself, like sustained serious burns, and there's a GoFundMe page for his medical costs, and I feel awful for the guy. So I don't want to disrespect. So, I feel awful for not liking his writing. So you know what? You guys make me feel better. Assuage my guilt. Go out and just buy a Brian Keene book. Any one of them. You don't even have to read it. Just buy it. I do appreciate, though, the work ethic it must take to do the stuff that this guy does. And also, he's nothing if not imaginative. I'll grant him that. So there you go. But my real counter recommendation is the Maze Runner movie. Chris M. Let's go with Jimmy Corrigan this month. Chris is alternating between Elektra, the comic book, and Jimmy Corrigan, another comic book, both of which I love. Chris M., and not related to Jimmy Corrigan or Elektra, did you watch Sharp Objects on HBO? Man, I loved that. You would appreciate that. So Sharp Objects on HBO. Chris H. I challenge you, Tom Chick, to review Nixonland by Rick Perlstein. Chris H. Is Nixonland not obsoleted by Fear by Bob Woodward? I was confused. I don't remember which one of the Washington Post Watergate guys, but Bob Woodward wrote Fear, right? Yeah. There's my counter recommendation. I think is it even out yet? I'm not sure. Just more timely, I guess. So Nixonland. All right, Chris H. 29, Patrick Mullen. Based on recent film discussions, I'd like to request the Western film oeuvre. He actually used the word oeuvre, but he capitalized it, so that's even extra snooty. Of Sam Peckinpah. So all Westerns directed by Sam Peckinpah. Yeah, I don't know is that allowed? I'll have to look up whether that's allowed. Just say all of these movies by this dude. My counter recommendation, Patrick Mullen, I'm more of a Friedkin guy. Any fella who, one after the other, makes The Exorcist, Sorcerer, and French Connection, and I'm going to say something that is only partly trolling, maybe 15% trolling, 85% in earnest, Coppola is overrated. Boom. All right, before you can even dispute that, we're moving on. All right, number 30, Soren Högland. Damn it, seems I've been... Oh yeah, so my last counter recommendation to him, Spring, Resolution, The Endless. He says, unfortunately, he's only had time to watch Spring. He sent me a great picture of all three movies laid out. It's like a triptych. And I recommended them all because you kind of have to see them all together. He says, unfortunately, he's only watched Spring, which wasn't included in the counter recommendation because Soren, I think Spring is terrible. Isn't that Lou Taylor Pucci? I love that guy, but man, I hated Spring. But Soren likes Spring. Good, Soren, glad. Anyway, I'd like to request a review of Yakuza 0, he says. Soren, did you see Upgrade? I know the fight scenes in Yakuza 0, the fighting in Yakuza. Yakuza is all about how you resolve problems with fighting, right? Did you see Upgrade? Because the fight scenes in Upgrade I really liked, and I thought that Lee Winnell, who directed it, happened upon a unique way to shoot fight scenes that we haven't seen before. So there's my counter recommendation. Finally, Eric Geithner, 31. I've recently heard good things about a TV show called The Sinner, starring Bill Pullman. My backlog of TV shows to watch is pretty big, but I'd love to know if this is worth checking out. I believe the first season is on Netflix. And he thanks me for the counter recommendation of SimCity Societies. He says he didn't play it when it came out. He completely forgot about it until I mentioned it. Now he has a new city builder. Now, he writes, I wonder if Sim Golf holds up. I do too, Eric. If it does, let me know. Eric, my counter recommendation. So Bill Pullman, so my counter recommendation normally would be cat licked my toes. Come here, fatty. My counter recommendation normally would be a movie I love called Killer Inside Me, which is Michael Winterbottom doing a pitch perfect adaptation of a Jim Thompson novel. I mean, it's just like grim and dark and come here. Oh my God, you're huge. However, that can be a tough watch. Okay, that can be a tough watch. So it's super grim. I mean, it does not soft pedal any of the Jim Thompson. So instead, I'm going to counter recommend a movie that's not good, but that lets Bill Pullman have a lot of fun. It's called Ballad of Lefty Brown, and the whole conceit is it's a Western, but what if the lead character in the Western was the traditional old coot? What if the hero's not around, so the old coot has to take the role of the hero? You know, like Richard Jenkins in Bone Tomahawk, or Walter Brennan. I didn't care for it, but it was really fun watching Bill Pullman just, you know, him and his beard, just really enjoying this role. So there you go. There's my counter recommendation, Eric Geithner. All right, that's 31 submissions for this Patreon review request video. Let's now go to the boring old randomresult.com. I know, the crocodile ruined everything, didn't he? All right. Here we go. Cat, I can't, I'm gonna, all right, you know, here. Numbers between 1 and 31. Can you guys even see this? I can't reach across the table because I'm pinned under a cat. Here we go. I'm going to do draw now. Make sure it's taking. I think it's taking. Right? There it goes. Number 4. So congratulations to Trevor Apple for getting me to watch Cowboy Bebop. Anime. How many are there? Is it long? Wow, Cowboy Bebop? It's a cartoon. It's a Japanese cartoon. All right, Trevor Apple. Trevor Apple, you get a lot of goodwill for that book, Fup, that you recommended. Thank you guys so much for watching, and especially 2 things. Thank you for your support. It just means a lot to me that I get to do what I do because of you guys. And also, thank you for your patience. These aren't as monthly as they should be. The list of back reviews, it's there. I'm aware of it. But everything that gets picked will eventually get reviewed. I promise you. It might take a while, but all of the stuff is in the works. So again, thank you guys so much. Happy September, October, happy autumn, I guess. Cheers, and we'll see you next time.